Tonight, a limited shipment of life-saving supplies finally arrives in Gaza. Calls for additional aid.
The health system is on the brink of collapse.
To address a spiraling humanitarian crisis.
Like all of you, we're gravely concerned.
As Canada commits to spend more. Leaving Lebanon.
We're all just waiting for them to be able to help us leave the country.
Canadians looking to flee over fears the war may spread beyond the border. Plus, rallies for student rights.
No space for hate!
The parents do not want this for their children.
Our community is here to show up for our most vulnerable folks.
Confrontations across the country over school curriculum.
CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo. Reporting tonight, Heather Butts.
Good evening. Aid is now trickling into Gaza 2 weeks after the militant group Hamas rampaged through southern Israel, launching a conflict that now threatens a regional war. More than 200 trucks have been waiting for days, but only a small amount were allowed in, many saying it's still not enough. Along the Gaza border, Israeli tanks and armored vehicles are standing by as the military plans to step up attacks on the Gaza Strip. The tragic loss of life mounting on both sides, now more than 5,700. CTV's Heather Wright starts off our coverage tonight from Tel Aviv.
After 12 days under a total siege, aid has arrived in Gaza. 20 trucks were allowed to enter at the Rafah border crossing this morning, carrying food, water, and medicine. We hope that this is just the beginning, says this Red Crescent worker, and that sufficient aid will arrive.
But humanitarian aid may finally start moving across the border. The Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza may open as early as Friday, allowing roughly 20 trucks, including 5 carrying medical supplies, to start rolling in.
Does it make sense that 20 trucks will be distributed to 2 million people, this man says? What will each one take? 20 trucks are nothing and not enough. Israel is ramping up airstrikes 2 weeks after Hamas carried out its horrific massacre that killed more than 1,400 people. And as a ground invasion appears ever more likely, calls for a ceasefire are growing louder.
It cannot work without security guarantees. And this is why we've been calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. We need to be able to send our trucks and send our people and know that they're not going to get killed or shot or taken in between.
Fuel will not be part of any shipments for now, with fears it would fall into the hands of Hamas. But negotiations are underway to allow more aid in. Today, Israel repeated its warnings for residents to move south, advising civilians that aid will be delivered there. Israeli airstrikes continued overnight, ambulances rushing victims to this hospital in the south of Gaza, where supplies to treat the injured are running dangerously low. The death toll in Gaza has now surpassed 4,000, including an estimated 1,500 children, according to the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health. Protests are taking place around the world, including in the occupied West Bank, where a 15-year-old was killed during clashes with Israeli troops. By the will of Allah, this man says, we will take revenge.
While the Rafah border crossing opened briefly today, foreigners, including hundreds of Canadians, have still not been allowed to leave Gaza, as efforts to allow them to cross into Egypt continue. Heather.
CTV's Heather Wright in Tel Aviv. Heather, thank you. The 2 newly freed American hostages abducted by Hamas gunmen are said to be doing well, reunited with family in Israel. The mother and daughter spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden, who pledged to work to release other American hostages.
I want to say thank you for all your services for Israel.
Well, look, that's been long serving. I'm just delighted we're able to get you out. We've been working on it a long time. We're gonna get them all out, God willing.
The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem shared this photo on social media of Judith and Natalie Rannan speaking to Biden. Leaders from more than a dozen countries, including Canada, are in Egypt tonight for a peace summit aimed at de-escalating the violence. Here's CTV's Jeremy Charon on the goal and Canada's humanitarian contribution.
Throughout ongoing attacks in the Gaza Strip, world leaders and top officials gathered for a peace summit in neighboring Egypt.
We cannot and must not ignore the wider context for these tragic events. But nothing can justify the reprehensible assault by Hamas.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly announced new funding, another $50 million in humanitarian assistance for Gaza.
It will address the urgent needs of the most vulnerable civilians in this crisis. Because even in times of crisis, there are principles, and even in times of war, there are rules.
The meeting, a first step, some experts say, in a global push towards finding peace.
I think something's going to come out of that summit right now. No, not really. But I think that it's the beginning of a good process.
Humanitarian aid organizations say the 20 trucks allowed into Gaza today don't even come close to delivering the much-needed relief to the more than 2 million.
The trucks that we entered today is enough to feed 200,000 people, more or less, for a day. So definitely we are advocating with everyone that we need to get in more food aid into Gaza.
But that would require a sustained, safe humanitarian corridor in the region, needed too to supply a struggling healthcare system.
Hospitals are absolutely overwhelmed. We're, I think very much in a situation where the health system is on the brink of collapse.
Meanwhile, there are growing calls in Ottawa for the Prime Minister to take a harder stance. 33 MPs, including many Liberals, have signed a letter demanding Canada support a ceasefire. Salma Zahid is leading that charge.
When I, as a mother, I see those videos coming in of the innocent young children being killed, it deeply hurts. There needs to be a ceasefire.
Now, that letter also calls on Canada to help open a humanitarian corridor, which Global Affairs says is crucial to get the more than 400 Canadians in Gaza out safely. Heather?
All right, Jeremy, thank you. Now that many Canadians have left Israel, Ottawa will end evacuation flights from Tel Aviv on Monday. It comes as Canadians are now struggling to flee Lebanon amid fears of a wider war. CTV's Tony Grace reports.
Another strike along Israel's northern border, targeting the Iran-backed Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Israel says it fired back after an anti-tank missile attack on an Israeli community. Stop so that you do not suffer another defeat, warned a Hezbollah official in Beirut today. You have no hope of victory. Almost daily clashes between Hezbollah and Israel have become the deadliest since 2006, displacing thousands and raising concerns about a new northern front in the Israel-Hamas war.
I don't know how long we have to wait here. They're saying the airports are going to close, they're going to shut down.
Maya Kassad is one of more than 16,000 Canadians in Lebanon.
All I'm looking for is for a safe return for me and my husband.
She's pregnant and wants to leave, but is having trouble getting her husband a visa, even after calls, emails, and an hour-long drive to an embassy.
And they still wouldn't help you in person?
Yeah, there's a lot of people like me here, and we're all, praying that this can expedite the process and, the urgency.
Global Affairs is urging Canadians to leave Lebanon, warning that its ability to help people get out may diminish if the conflict escalates. The Canadian military says it's planning for possible evacuations if the situation deteriorates. This retired Canadian general says Hezbollah's arsenal is a wild card at the moment.
What is possible, of course, is for them to use some of their 150,000 rockets and missiles, some of which are precision-guided missiles, and will be particularly problematic to Israel.
The U.S. Secretary of State has now warned Lebanon's caretaker prime minister about his country getting drawn into the war. And tonight, a spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces did the same, referring to Hamas as, quote, the ISIS of Gaza. Heather.
Tony, thank you. The raging war has fueled demonstrations for both sides. Today, more protests around the world.
1, 2, 3, 4! Occupation no more!
Around 100,000 protesters marched in the streets of London, demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Thousands rallied in Sydney, receiving last-minute approval from police following controversy over a previous event that featured anti-Jewish chants. Tunisians showed solidarity for Palestinians while skeptical over Cairo's peace summit.
All the countries, where are you? You must understand. It's crazy. We are in hell. In hell.
Israeli protesters in Tel Aviv demanded the immediate return of their loved ones being held hostage by Hamas. Here in Canada, a pro-Palestinian rally in Toronto and dueling demonstrations in Winnipeg. The war has sparked anger towards the Muslim and Jewish communities in this country, with some police forces reporting an increase in hate crimes. CTV's Angela Mackenzie with a hurtful display in Montreal.
This graffiti spray painted near a mosque in St. Leonard on Friday. Kill all Muslims, along with Nazi symbols, a man hanging, the word pigs, and the misspelled word Israel.
Fear and shock, honestly.
Samer Majoub with the Canadian Muslim Forum says it's been upsetting for the community, though it's not an isolated incident. Since the Israel-Hamas war broke out, Montreal police are reporting 11 hate crimes and hate incidents have targeted Arab Muslim communities. 25 hate crimes and hate incidents have targeted the Jewish community. And that's just what's been reported to police. The Canadian Muslim Forum believes the numbers are much higher.
Even after 9/11, we haven't seen what we are seeing now.
MP Anthony Housefather says he's hearing from young Jewish constituents who have faced anti-Semitism, bullying, and intimidation in school and online.
A huge increase in anti-Semitic posts on social media, which is where most of our youth, most of our kids, most of our students are seeing anti-Semitism.
Montreal's police chief says the SPVM has been meeting daily with Jewish and Muslim community leaders.
We are increasing for the last 2 weeks more police officers in special area, strategic area, to make sure that we are reassuring the community.
As many call for peace and non-violence in Montreal.
I have my own emotions, you have your own emotions. This is one thing, but to translate this into the street and into hate on anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, it doesn't serve anyone and it will help no cause whatsoever.
People are all feeling an increased rate of hostility and hate. And the important thing for me is that we all need to set an example that this cannot happen in Canada.
Majoub says the graffiti was quickly removed with the help of a Jewish man. A positive message he hopes will unite Montrealers. Angela Mackenzie, CTV News.
There is much tension and opposing opinions across the country, with competing protests today about the way schools instruct sexuality and gender identity. Here's CTV's Alexandra Hollick on what's behind the opposing rallies.
Chants rang out on the grounds of the Manitoba Legislative Building today as hundreds gathered in support of young queer and trans people.
I am a queer parent, I am a non-binary parent. What I am saying is that I want my child to be able to talk about his queer family and the beautiful people that love and support us.
Parents, children, and teachers were among those rallying alongside the No Space for Hate collective.
That's our #1 call within our professional code, is to support students and families, but that means supporting everybody.
The group was part of a counter-protest in response to the 1 Million March for Children stationed at City Hall, where dozens of demonstrators called for the new provincial NDP government to remove books they say are too sexually explicit for children.
That the parents do not want this for their children. We don't hate any kids. We don't hate any trans kids, nothing. But you can't do that to little kids with those books.
It's the first march and counter-protest organized since the fall of the Progressive Conservative provincial government, which championed parental rights as part of its campaign. Families Minister Nahani Fontaine reaffirmed the province's position with her own statement, saying the government stands firm in support of 2S LGBTQI+ Manitobans and against any form of discrimination or intimidation that puts the lives of 2S LGBTQI+ youth at risk. The demonstrations here in Winnipeg are only a fraction of the cross-country controversy and confrontations over curriculum. The rallies come on the heels of the Saskatchewan government's passing of its controversial Parents' Bill of Rights Friday, requiring parental consent before children under the age of 16 can use a different gender-related name or pronoun at school.
That's simply unacceptable. We can't have that here in Manitoba. We can't have that anywhere here in Canada.
In terms of next steps, both groups say they plan to keep calling for action from the provincial government to support young students here in Manitoba. Alexandra Hollick, CTV News, Winnipeg.
Coming up, tuition trouble.
That's just not an option. We can't afford it anymore.
Raising questions over rising rates. Plus, building a dream full of color. Hundreds of high school students will pack the grounds of Quebec universities this weekend for fall open house sessions. But the government's decision to hike tuition for out-of-province students is forcing some families to reconsider their plans. CTV's Vanessa Lee on the impact that's already being felt.
Some Canadian high school students are now scrambling to come up with a plan B. No one expected they'd have to shell out $17,000 for tuition next fall. Ireland Bazendowski has dreamed of studying at Bishop's University since she was 14.
It's really, really devastating, and I planned on going to the education program to be a high school math teacher, and they have just an excellent education program. It's just not an option. We can't afford it anymore.
Quebec's 3 English universities worry the doubling of tuition will be catastrophic for their enrollment. McGill says it has been forced to suspend a $50 million program aimed at encouraging its community to learn French, stating finding the initial funding for the investment was extremely difficult. The Minister of Higher Education is defending the hike.
It's a choice we've made,
justifying it as a way to balance the funding of English and French universities in the province.
I have the responsibility to make sure that the system and the whole network is equitable for everybody.
It's not against the Anglophones, it's to protect French.
Business leaders say it will be a huge blow to the economy, with students from all over the country spending nearly $200 million here every year.
If the government strongly believe in a strong economy, they want to reduce the gap between Ontario and Quebec. I have to say, this measure, what it will support is more people going to Toronto.
The province says it wants to stop subsidizing students who come here for a cheaper education, costing taxpayers $110 million annually, though some believe the real reason is not fiscal.
I see it as a continuation of a trend to diminish the influence of Anglophone institutions within Quebec.
Critics say they understand the need to protect the French language, adding the solution is not to scare students away, but rather to help them integrate into Quebec society. Vanessa Lee, CTV News, Montreal.
Well, here's one way to get your steps in. 5,000 people walked up the nearly 1,800 steps of the CN Tower to raise money for charity.
At this point, it's a personal challenge, but at the same time, I'm supporting United Way, who do so many good things for so many people.
99-year-old Walter Decker was among the climbers. The fundraiser returned after a 3-year hiatus. Well, still ahead, fashioning new opportunities. A richness of creativity in one of Kenya's poorest communities. Some young fashion designers are showcasing one of the poorest communities in Kenya as a place of inspiration and opportunity. Held in Nairobi's largest informal settlement, the event redefined style and creativity. CTV's Melanie Nagy on the sustainable fashion revolution.
Kibera is one of the world's largest urban slums. It's also a place of contradiction. Severe poverty permeates the Kenyan community, but with that, there's also a richness of creativity and inventiveness recently on full display at Kibera's very own Fashion Week.
Here in our community, we have like variety of designers.
David Ochieng is the event's founder. He's also one of Kibera's most successful designers.
We are street fashion designers, so we want to show people how we live. We don't want people to get to here to know about how we live, but we want to show them ourselves.
The 27-year-old was born and raised in the sprawling slum, but where others often see endless hardship, he sees ample art and abundant talent.
This is how we live, and this is our vibe, because we have everything we need here.
Kibera's show, which is in its second year, showcased 11 designers plucked from a pool of more than 300 candidates. Millicent Uluoch made her debut at the event. Her collection transforms secondhand clothes into fresh new designs.
It took a lot to do this. There was a time I almost gave up, but thank God I made it through. So the world seeing what I did is such an amazing thing.
Determination, ingenuity, and skill woven into fashion that's shifting the way people see Kibera. Melanie Nagy, CTV News, Vancouver.
After the break, piecing together a dazzling display, one colorful little brick at a time. Finally for us tonight, the story of a Lego enthusiast whose plastic pastime began as a way to relieve stress and spend some time with his sons. But as CTV's Adam Sawatsky explains, his creative ingenuity earned him an international invitation to a world of imagination.
Let's start working on it.
Yeah, let's build ourselves a house.
In the beginning, Mike Sinclair was simply using Lego to bond with his boys.
You really see the joy that they get out of it.
When Mike wasn't supporting them in building custom creations or making stop-motion movies, he would take them to Lego conventions.
I was just blown away by what the possibilities were.
Mike was inspired to build something of his own and discovered it would also dismantle his stress at the end of the day.
Kind of let go and then just let things flow.
Mike started creating simple scenes, which led to more complex ones, in a room now dedicated to Lego.
The room is way over the top.
Now that his boys have grown up, the space is part sanctuary, part showcase, and all meticulously organized art studio.
I never viewed myself as having artistic ability.
But after a lifetime of lacking a creative outlet,
it felt like something I probably should have been doing all along.
Here is where Mike has designed one-of-a-kind, thinking-outside-the-box builds, featuring characters and stories told through creative details that have earned kudos from both local and online Lego communities.
It's a pretty neat feeling, that recognition from your peers.
But nothing like the feeling of receiving an email from Lego headquarters saying, "We're impressed."
I was sure it was some sort of a prank.
Turns out it was legit. A once-in-a-lifetime invitation to embark on an all-expense-paid trip to Denmark, to be one of just 15 adult builders from around the world to have their work displayed at Lego House.
It's a pretty big recognition.
Like an amateur actor handpicked from obscurity to appear at the Oscars.
Yeah.
After Mike accepted, he built this dramatic action scene featuring gingerbread men defending themselves against hungry elves, which is now on display at the Lego House Masterpiece Gallery, with the goal of inspiring more than 250,000 visitors a year.
It's a dream come true of a dream that I never really had.
A dream sparked by a dad bonding with his boys over bricks.
And we're done, finally.
Good job.
Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Nanaimo.
Some impressive creations. That's our show for this evening. We'd like to congratulate Sandy Ronaldo, who's being inducted into the RTDNA Hall of Fame tonight. Have a good night.